Hey guys, I want to talk about how to name colors because I think a lot of marketers and designers are in this situation where you're working on a product and one of the main variants is its color. So you find yourself in the situation where you have to come up with colors, but you can't just name it like green or yellow. You want it to be more creative and more functional, more helpful. And when I had to do this, I tried to find resources to help me with this. I didn't find any, so I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of work on this, and this is everything I know about how to name colors. So the Norman Nielsen Group has this great article by Jacob Nielsen from a few years back, kind of famous, called 10 Usability Heuristics for User Interface Design, which is just like good principles for designing user interfaces. And the second one is this, that you should have a match between the system and the real world. The system, that is a thing that you're designing, should speak the user's language with words, phrases, concepts familiar to the users, rather than system-oriented terms. And so the idea is that you already have a cornucopia of color associations, okay? Colors, we're speaking from what we're talking about. But if you think about it in another context, other sort of things that you could be designing, think about like door handles. So if you're an architect, you don't want to really change the form, the geometry of a door handle too much because we already have a pattern that's set into us, you know, a shape, and that you like, we all have this understanding that you like grab it and you pull. Or you think about Google and their material design, how they dealt with shadows, and they said, you know, they're trying to, you know, design a visual system so that you can communicate stacking or z-depth when things are on top of each other on a user interface. And so they said, hey, we already have this understanding of how shadows work in the real world. Why don't we replicate it? And so that's what they did with shadows. So what about colors? Well, we are going to talk about 5 rules and 3 tips for naming colors. And the first one comes from this principle, and that is to use associations or domains when you're naming colors. There are 3 main domains, and that is food, nature, and geography. So we have an understanding of what red is when it's the red of a cherry or a red of an apple. Okay, that would be food. In nature, we have cherry blossom pink, you know, which is not just a generic pink, it's a specific sort of muted pink. Or you can think about geography in terms of the sea is a very particular type of blue. And so not only does using associations and domains feel good, but it's actually functional. It actually aids and reduces the cognitive load on people because they're like, oh, I already have this association. I already have this thing in my brain that you can tap into that's both enjoyable and functional. So the first rule is to use associations and domains. The second rule is to be particular and not abstract. So here are 2 real colors from these paint manufacturers. And we have Epic and Frolic. So just think in your brains right now, what colors would they be? And my guess is that there's a wide variety of what people might think of for these terms. But they're probably not these colors, right? And so you want particular words, not these abstract words, because abstract can really apply to anything. Now you can use abstract words, but that's going to come in a later rule that we have. Those are good. Abstract terms are good for modifiers, that is, they're modifying another word, not for just one singular name of a color. So in contrast to these kind of abstract terms, let's not throw Valspar and Sherwin-Williams under the bus. They've got wonderful names here. Lemon curd, what a wonderful yellow name. Or daisy. See, we have these associations of these yellows. Now, let me footnote this right here for not throwing them under the bus. When you have companies that have to name thousands of colors, these rules that I'm presenting, you can't abide by them. There's just too many. So they get a pass on these things. But most people, when they're naming colors, don't have to name thousands. They might have to name typically under 100, okay? So be particular and not abstract. The third rule is to be clear and not confusing. So for instance, if you were to name coconut, what color is coconut? Well, if you're confused, that's right, because coconuts have two dominant colors. They have the white of the interior meat, and they have the brown of the exterior shell. So there's not a strong association because there's two colors. So what you could do instead is you could say coconut white or coconut brown. That would be clear. Or you could say coconut milk, and then you're using a modifier to clearly denote which of the two you're referring to. So be clear and not confusing. Rule 4, you want to be easy and universal, not hard and niche. So with most design, you're trying to reduce cognitive load and increase the pleasure that people have when they're working with these designs that you're doing. And so you have a color here called Playa Arenosa, and it's by Sherwin-Williams. And so when I first heard this, I'm thinking, okay, so first of all, it's in another language, a language not targeted to most people who they're designing for. And I'm assuming that it's a location, but I don't know, and so I would have to look it up and figure out what it means, and then maybe then I can get an association. But it's a lot of work for this name. Another example of a sort of bad or difficult name, a sort of unintelligible one, would be, I've seen one, sheepskin clay. Sheepskin clay, and you're like, you're just putting two words together, and it's confusing when they're together. So, in contrast, Sherwin-Williams, here's a great one, cream and sugar. Oh, it's easy. Everyone has that experience. It's a wonderful experience of putting cream and sugar in your coffee, and you feel good about it, you know what it is, and it's wonderful. Okay, rule number 5 is to combine words, and this is big. Combine words and use modifiers. So let's think about this. And here's a helpful tool when you're trying to think about modifiers. So let's say you have a color here, and you can put it on an axis, a 2-axis, and on one axis you can put its saturation, and the other its luminance, or what we kind of call brightness. That's not technically correct, but it's fine. It's brightness, so light to dark and saturated and desaturated. Then you can fill in this chart with words that connote these things, more words that modifiers that have more to do with saturation and desaturation. So, for instance, if you had a dried red or a dried rose, that's a term of desaturation. Similarly, you can fill out words on the axis of luminance, so modifiers that connote more bright colors and more dark ones. So once you have this, then you can start matching up terms, combining them, using good modifiers. So here's an example here of we have December December being the modifier, and dried lavender. And those are lovely colors because we have those associations there, and modifying them gives us the taste of that particular color, not just a lavender, not just a blue, greenish thing, but a particular one, and one that we have an association with. So just The bare colors would be here, lavender and sea. But notice what happens when we move these into what we had. We have that dried lavender and that December sea. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, rule number 6, and this is kind of easy, but do your research. These main companies that have done all this work on colors, they have amazing teams, and they've got just this wonderful collection of language that you can pillage from. You don't want to copy them exactly, but you can mix and match, and they've done just such an amazing work. You want to look at what they've done. Okay, so let's sort of put this into practice. So imagine you got this color, you've got a blue, and you're like, okay, well, you can't just have that kind of boring blue. So maybe it's dark blue. But you're like, well, let's think in terms of associations, right? Do we have any associations with this color? We're like, well, it's kind of like blueberry, right? And you're like, okay, but can we be even more particular and specific? Be like, yeah, it's it's kind of like a desaturated blueberry. It's not like a really saturated one. So you're like, okay, what's a word? Oh, you could call it a frosted blueberry. And then there you have it. You've got this beautiful, wonderful, descriptive blue color of frosted blueberry. Okay, so those are the rules. And then let me close with a few tips, quick tips. And that is, if you're deciding between equals, think about the oral or the aesthetic qualities of the words. Sometimes names are hard to say and you might really like it, but it can be tricky for your sales or your marketing team to deal with. Second, compare it with your current palette. So sometimes you'll have themes. So maybe you have one palette that has a food theme or a wood theme or something like that. And so if you have patterns already in your palette, just pay attention to that. And lastly, and of course, do not be cliche. Okay, I hope you guys found that helpful. That's everything I know about colors. If you have any questions or if you have any comments on it or if you appreciate it, you can reach me at Twitter at The Moon Designer. Thanks so much, guys. Let me know if you've got any comments. See ya.